Hello everyone, welcome back to Alkaline Hydroxide 784. Well, you might be wondering how I did in terms of productivity after spending a lot of time doing the match episode. Let's just say I literally wrote this script yesterday. Well, anyways, today to continue the subject mania, let's look at I suppose maybe you expected me to do chemistry or physics or whatever, but if I were to actually do that, I will spend way too much time on it. So yeah, just make do with philo. But honestly, there are quite a few philosophical GP questions. Although to be honest, that doesn't mean that you need to know why philosophy is useful. I think that's already one reason, the fact that there's GP questions which are philosophical. So being able to think like that kind of helps. But but either way, I think it's quite worthwhile to cover this particular subject called philosophy. So yeah, you might be wondering, is this really a subject? Most of you may not even have taken philosophy classes before, and even like I was wondering why we had to take philosophy classes in RGS, and somehow I even got to be a philosophy rep. How? So let's start with that questioning look people give when you tell the word philosophy to them. Most of us who probably don't have philo for a major are like, why does one even need to learn it? And yeah, you could say most people seem to get by just fine without taking a single philosophy class. I mean, it feels quite idealized and very theoretical in nature. It just feels like very far fetched from actual reality. And the reality is never really the same as what we can form a basic argument out of. Right? Right? Wait a minute. Well, that's actually a pretty narrow way to look at philosophy. In reality, it does recognize potential fallacies. Like, for example, we have something like one where if your argument only accounts for two different choices, A or B, and in reality that's not the case. There's more than two outcomes. There's one such fallacy. Another one is slippery slopes, where you start with one thing, then you say it leads to another thing, and it leads to a third thing, and you keep saying like leading to more and more things until it becomes super bad. Or even stuff like red herrings or any other kinds of fallacies of that you can learn from in a philosophy class. And let's be honest, it's not like science doesn't simplify stuff to make it easier to model and understand. I mean, if you really wanted to include all the factors inside a single experiment, it's not going to end well. It's going to be quite hard to study, and you really need to simplify the thing a lot in order to understand it well. So yeah, it's not really a fair argument to say philosophy is too idealized or too, you know, very removed from the reality, because mathematics is also like that and we use it for a lot of things. And there's a value in doing that even in terms of thoughts and ideas. Then what about those people who just find philosophy hard to get and just really boring and pointless and just like, just spend your days just thinking about random stuff? Well, yeah, of course, like anything else, philosophy is going to be boring to some and interesting to others. But is it pointless? Well, it depends on what exactly you ask in your philosophy. Because think about it, some of the questions that appear in philosophy actually end up in the admittedly useful science domain. You know what? I think the best way to understand that philosophy is useful is simply to look at its definition and you'll get it immediately. So according to Wikipedia, because actually Wikipedia seems to be quite useful to get a general overview of any topic, and since you don't really have to quote your sources in GPSA, no one's gonna check. But anyway, so philosophy is something that covers the fundamental and general questions that humans have to ask. So these questions are like the big questions, like for example, how we came about, and I think that's the most common one that people would quote. So like, why are humans here? Why is the earth a thing in the sense? So this actually inspired both religion and science. They also ask about what is right and wrong, which is we all know something called ethics, which is to keep ourselves sane. And of course, the pursuit of reason, aka logic, And if you remember last time, logic is the precursor to even maths. So technically it is quite important, huh? So I think we figured it out. Let's go. Bye. Okay, just kidding. We're not done yet. Here's here's my argument for not leaving yet, because if you leave the video, you'll miss the rest of the content in this video. And this video contains potentially useful content. Therefore, leaving this video will cause you to miss potentially useful content. As you can see, this is a typical structure of an argument. It may seem pretty redundant to write it this way and just go directly to leaving this video is a bad idea or something. But one thing emphasized by the fact that I phrased the argument in that way is that we have to target the specific argument at hand and go step by step instead of jumping to conclusions too quickly. So what's my point of saying that? Well, philosophy shows one how to approach a question or answer such a question. Basically, identify the steps and go step by step. But at least that's what it seems to do from my point of view. If you think of it in a different way, that you can write that. So with that, let's look at the first point for today, because we already gave the main argument, but we need to give some examples and some varying instances of it. So let's look at the first point, which is logic, because that's what we are doing just now, trying to create some logic. So yeah, if you weren't paying attention just now, philosophy kinda involves logic, which in turn is the overarching kind of thing for most of science and maths. So I'm just going to give examples because I think the main argument is pretty clear already. You can just adjust it according to each point and say it in a way, like tell how it's useful for each part of it. Okay, so let's start with maths. So in maths, we have many mathematical theories and subdivisions and branches and everything out there. But for all of these theories, there's usually another theory behind it. So some of you might wonder what exactly is the most fundamental theory in maths then. Well, Euclid came up with 5 axioms and 5 postulates. What gibberish are you speaking? Some of you might be wondering, but fear not, let me enlighten you. Basically, axioms are like the most fundamental theories which are considered as true without controversy. And postulates are axioms on geometry stuff, so like how you can create a line or how a plane is defined and things like that. So that's pretty much it. And this word axiom is technically somewhat of a philosophical term. So in a sense, maths was approached and can be approached in a logical, technically philosophical manner. Yeah, so that's the first example. If you want to know the actual axioms and all that, just read the links because I don't want to waste time covering that. Okay, so next example is the scientific method. So how many of you actually remember the steps of the scientific method? Well, I don't expect any perfect memorization of them because you can just look at Google and we get the steps. But have you all wondered where the scientific method even came from and why it works? In fact, I kind of heard a bit about it on philosophy class as well. So yeah, it seems to be a philosophical thing to begin with. And historically, it's likely to have originated from epistemology, which is the thing that I put next to logic in the title just now, because it's somewhat similar. And it's a philosophy branch that studies knowledge. Yep. So as epistemology, which is philosophy in a way, allowed our ancestors to think of ways to garner knowledge and test it. And this eventually became the scientific method you probably don't know, but maybe love today. So yeah, it's pretty conclusive that philosophy has connections with maths and science. If you want more examples, do look at the links, and there's actually some interesting articles on the connections between the two, or even an article about the scientific method and what exactly is considered the scientific method. So now that we look at the epitome of logic, science, let's look at its beloved opponent, religion. So you know that a lot of the world religions have a multitude of stories about the beginning of the world. The story of how their god or gods did stuff or created the world or stuff like that. So how did these stories even come about? Well, it's because people can be like they just can't be without finding an answer to things, even if they haven't had the tools to measure or quantify or even confirm what they have with the like what was around them or what theories they had. So in the past, when science hadn't developed a theory of the beginning of the universe, of course people still asked, why are we here today? Why is the earth even a thing? And you know the easiest way to answer that question when you don't have fancy big telescopes and cool space simulations? Try your best with whatever little you know about the world and say a higher being did it. There you go, folks. Of course, not all of the stories in religious texts have been invalidated by science yet, and that's precisely why I think religion still survives. And even as we find more and more stuff in science, each new thing that we find is basically like picking up one sand grain in a vast beach. It's probably going to take eternity to truly be the knower of all knowledge. So whatever we don't know, we usually apply a story with some logic. You know, like we assume or we hope that, that there are gods and they have magical powers and stuff like that. And we say that this is how this happened. So literally asking questions like this, which is technically philosophy, allowed people to pursue both science and religion. And yeah, that's the second place in which you see philosophy. So now let's look at something both science and religion care about, ethics. Ethics is literally a branch of philosophy, so I guess it's easier to understand this. Of course, there are quite a few places where ethics is used. I mean, I literally just said two of them, science and religion. Religion means in the text that you have certain rules and stuff, and it's generally based on what people consider as ethical. And likewise, in science, we do have certain ethical rules to follow. Yeah, but first, let's look at the law, the actual law. Generally, the law is based on what is considered right and wrong, and that is determined by ethics. And in fact, ethics can be determined in various ways. There's quite a few ways of determining what is considered a good action or a bad action. Stuff like deontology, utilitarianism. I probably pronounced that wrongly, but anyways, consequentialism, etc., etc., etc. But the stuff that does become laws in many places, like for example, stuff like stealing and killing and things like that, is a crime. Well, it's considered bad in all of these various methods. Like if you use all of them, you come to a conclusion that this is a bad thing to do. So yeah, to a general extent, ethics does determine a large part of laws, especially the ones that are quite clear cut and people do agree that it's wrong. And if you're wondering about those wishy-washy controversial rules, the opinion of the public generally is used as the governing rule. Or maybe it's the government's own opinion, so they just impose their own rules. It depends on the country as well. So, I mean, yeah, if you're wondering why I threw that statement in about the wishy-washy stuff, well, let's look at self-driving cars. In self-driving cars, if let's say a car encounters an obstacle, well, it has to make certain decisions when it faces an obstacle. Should it hit an old man versus a young person, or like if that's the only two choices that it has, in a sense, like what should it do? And this is basically determined by public opinion. In the end of the day, it's just what most people think is the right thing to do. So yeah, laws and ethics do coexist, and there are also other places in which ethics becomes important. But yeah, of course, the car example can be found in the episode on I believe artificial intelligence, so you can go and watch that on your own. Yeah, so the first place we'll be talking about is research. So when you're researching, and this is what I meant by ethics in science, when researching, we need to know what is allowed and what is not allowed to be researched, or who or what are we allowed to experiment on, humans, lab rats, wild animals, or cell samples. Are we allowed to try stuff like cloning things or altering any DNA? And also, like those are the things that people usually think of when you talk about research ethics. But for researchers themselves, there's another part of ethics which is more frequently, um, frequently observed and frequently like common in the sense it's more common, and it's stuff like laws to follow, like rules to follow when doing research. For example, don't plagiarize, don't falsify claims, and basically how strictly you should analyze the data, how best to analyze the data to make sure that you're not accidentally finding something that's not truly there, like correlation doesn't equate causation thing, or how wide a net to cast, like how many variables to investigate, which we saw last time in the mathematics episode. P-hacking is a thing, and if you accidentally do it, then yeah, you may find something that's not really the case. So ethics does matter a lot in research, and yeah, it's pretty important, and will still be important for time to come. So AI plus innovation slash technology in general. So I did mention self-driving cars. They have to consider certain ethics in order to, make a decision in a disastrous situation. But apart from self-driving cars, if we talk about AI, there are like robots and things like that. What is the limit? Should we actively avoid breaching what we consider the moral limits? Like, should we like make sure that we don't exceed a certain thing that we think would be a bad idea? Should we attempt giving sentience? Not that we are anywhere near doing so to machines. Or should we write like a code of rules on what is allowed and what is not allowed in AI? And it's not just AI. A lot of technology actually comes with ethical questions. Just as we saw like many years ago, like the negative consequences of TNT being used for warfare instead of for noble purposes, pun intended. And we see stuff like drones used for warfare too. Today's drones, they're used for warfare, but they can also be used for normal things like delivering food and just playing around with. And phones and Internet of Things potentially allowing privacy breaches. And in the future, we probably need to be aware of any ethical or moral concerns while building something. And apart from making the thing, it is also about who gets the authority to, get the thing, or like, no, sorry, who gets the authority to use the thing and how they use the thing. So this is with regards to how companies do stuff. Like for example, whether tobacco companies and petroleum companies, well, are they allowed to even interfere in certain legal proceedings or to go against certain campaigns to advocate for their products, or is it immoral? So that's a question like that we can ask as well with regards to ethics. So, for example, like the explanation here is in terms of the tobacco companies, they are basically, um, how do I say it? They're like disrespecting e-cigarettes and and vaping and stuff like that. And this could be seen as just a way to solidify their certain market, and not really as a means to avoid people from using those such products to begin with. And in terms of petroleum companies, yeah, so you can actually see it in episode 10 if you want to look at the advertising part of things. You can also look at petroleum companies. Basically, what they did is quite a few of them, they have like engineers and scientists there. And those engineers did find out, or like researchers, I guess, they did find out that the petroleum has a bad negative environmental impact on the world, right? Many, many years ago, in fact. But the companies themselves actually did probably ignored some of those research and still decided to make the petroleum because money. So are such companies allowed to do this? Are they allowed to do whatever they want to get money, or is it immoral? We still haven't really come around to answering that question fully, and I think it's quite important to know that. Right, so yeah, as you can see, ethics is important and everywhere. And yeah, even in religion, we notice that different religions have different views on the same stuff, and it depends on their sense of ethics, what they consider right and wrong. So, truly, I think philosophy is quite useful in the sense if you want to look at it from a purely a thought-based process rather than to look at it from a religious-based perspective or any other perspective. But that also depends on who you are personally, because your personal views are also influencing your thought process, and that in turn is influenced by your own biases and your own beliefs. So yeah, philosophy is definitely needed for us because we can question ourselves, we can question what is right and wrong, and also we can use it to get a general sense of ethics, which helps us avoid insanity, in a sense, avoid chaos, and also help us to question anything that seems a bit questionable, in a sense. Yeah, so we're done for today. That's the main argument, literally. The point is just that philosophy is useful because it helps us advance advanced thought in maths and science and do research in general, and at the same time helps us to think about our own rules, our own decisions that we make every day, and make sure that at the very least we try to do things that are good for the better, good for the future or good for other people and good for ourselves as well to some extent. Yeah, so we're done for today, and I hope you find this video useful. If you did, please press the like button and subscribe. And with that, I would like to say thank you and bye.